Greetings, friends, and welcome back to the Musings from the Mount podcast. I'm your host, Joseph Carenza. In this episode, we will examine the concept of luxury and our relationship with material wealth. We'll explore how different cultures define luxury, examine the psychological drives behind our material desires, and we'll try to wrestle with some practical questions like, when does quality cross the line into status seeking? Or how do we appreciate beautiful craftsmanship without becoming enslaved by our possessions? Join us as we navigate this complex terrain using insights from the Trans-Himalayan wisdom traditions to understand what it truly means to be stewards of life's resources. And we hope you enjoy the episode. And if you do enjoy this podcast, please consider going to meditationmount.org and donating. Your donation helps us to bring you this podcast, as well as all the other programs the Mount produces both today and in the future. We are incredibly grateful and honored by your support. Okay, back to the podcast and the exploration of luxury. In approaching today's theme, which is from a wide view, is luxury and our relationship to it. And like everything, we look at it through the lens of like the Trans-Himalayan mystery tradition, Alice Bailey, Agni Yoga. But in doing the research for this episode, I wanted to maybe try to find a way to bring it home. And I couldn't help but think about one of my favorite books from junior high, and that was The Great Gatsby. So, the thing about The Great Gatsby is his tragedy didn't stem from wealth itself, but his relationship to it. It was using luxury as a substitute for like authentic self-realization. He tied everything, his self-worth, his whole worldview was to things. And then, sadly, at his funeral, there's like no one there, and all the money's gone, and the mansion is in tatters. So I think that, if you don't know a lot about the Trans-Himalayan, if you haven't read the Alice Bailey, that's something that I think everyone can relate to, because you can either watch the movie or see the book, read the book or see the movie.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point, because it's the relationship.
Yeah.
In the Ageless Wisdom teachings, it doesn't say anywhere that matter is bad. Mm-hmm. You shouldn't have matter. It's what is your relationship with matter?
Exactly.
Are you held captive by its allure?
Mm-hmm.
Do you utilize it to fashion beauty in time and space and substance?
Yeah.
So you're right. It's all about relationship. Yeah. Consciousness is a result of relationship. Mm-hmm. Relationship between people, between an artist and the object that is being crafted. Mm-hmm. It's all about relationship. And relationship is the field in which revelation takes place. And so we are in matter. Mm-hmm. You and I are sitting in bodies that, are dense physical bodies. If I bump into something, I go, ouch.
Yeah.
Yeah, because this is not a simulation.
Right. Yeah, I just thought that he embodied like his determination for accumulation was kind of what Alice Bailey talks about, the allure of matter.
That'd be great, because I've got other examples of how you can misread this and you get captured by needing to possess it rather than utilize it.
That's a great, because I was thinking about too, and I did say this before we started the podcast, but kind of two examples where, if you're an auto mechanic, you don't have one socket wrench because you're not going to get much done. But, you also, one person's salad fork is another person's luxury, because they just have one fork, so there is something to how you use the thing, your relationship to it. Do you use it as a tool to do more good in the world, or do you use it as a tool towards more accumulation?
Well, or to show that actually I own this better tool than you.
Right, exactly. And there is that exists. I think everyone can kind of relate to that on some level.
There are people that collect vintage cars, and they don't just stop at 10; they may have 200.
That is true. That is true. But one of the best things about this particular subject, and it's something that is one of my particular interests in the world, is the capacity for humans to want to make things black and white. And there's nothing more gray than that when we talk about luxury, because when you look at the role of luxury in a system, which is I spent a lot of time researching for this episode, and how it works, because historically luxury was the way you delineate, like, for lack of a better word, a caste within a society. Like certain members of the public or even the private were not allowed to wear certain colors. Like the dark indigo being reserved strictly for the royalty. And I find that as humans we love to put things in boxes. We love to put things in a hierarchy. And it's interesting that we use we did use luxury to delineate your place in that society.
That's a really good point, because there's some quotes from Agni Yoga and some other examples that I found that illustrate that. But the caste system didn't start out as a caste system like of a social order. It was delineating different levels of consciousness. So the colors were the inner colors, but then they made this material that this caste only could wear that, and then you would be reincarnated into this caste, or if you were the untouchables, that was it.
Yeah.
You were doomed forever kind of thing, and you're not even allowed to have your shadow touch somebody of a higher caste. That, for me, was an abomination and a distortion of the original reality of nature, saying that we all live in different gradations of awareness.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
That was what it was.
Yeah.
But we brought it down into matter, and we concretized it, and had rules about you can't do this, you can't do this, and if you're this, you have to, and therefore we imposed upon ourselves limitations, rather than seeing that if somebody is vibrating at this frequency and this color, they can actually be of assistance in helping somebody grow. So it goes back to the relationship we have, not just with the colors and the caste system, the relationship we have to life and each other. Are we equal sisters and brothers in one human family? Or am I the servant of this so-called brother?
It's true. And there's one thing I also like about this subject, and as we go along, we'll explore it, is it's super personal, because it requires a perspective and a context, and it is also kind of a check to see how your relationship to money and luxury will color how you take anything from this podcast. So it's good to watch yourself and how this, how it affects you.
Yeah, and I've lived a life where I've been dipped in different dimensions of the human experience. And I've had times where I had no money. I was out traveling. I was, and then other times when I earned good money, I had what I needed. And so what I realized, that all of these are just the trappings of where I find myself. And as you quite rightly said, it's about what is my relationship to my own identity that has nothing to do with my acquisitions. And what do I do with what I have?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the exploration, I think, where it makes quite a bit of sense.
Yeah, well, maybe we kick it off with a quote from Agni Yoga, just to light a fire, because Agni is fire. This is from Fiery World, Book 2. It's a fairly provocative statement. It has been said that humanity must abandon luxury. Not without reason have people themselves so isolated this concept. Luxury is not beauty, not spirituality, not perfectionment, not construction, not benevolence, not compassion. No good concept can replace it. Luxury is destruction of resources and possibilities. Luxury is dissolution, for all structures without rhythm mean only disintegration. One can see clearly enough that worldly luxury has already been shaken, but as a cure, harmonious cooperation must be found in order to rid the world of the plague of luxury. Egoism will raise the objection that luxury is an earned abundance. It will also be said that luxury is regal. This will be slander. Luxury has always been a sign of decay and eclipse of the spirit. The chains of luxury are most terrible, too, for the subtle world. Needed there are advancement and continuous perfectionment of thought. the encumbrance of luxury will not help one to the next gates. That's a pretty strong statement. It was written back in 1934.
Yeah.
Not that you say, well, I don't believe in that, I don't think that's right or wrong, but what is it saying beyond the reactions that people may have to what is evoked by these words? What does it say to you, Joey?
Well, I think regardless of what spiritual tradition you follow, or if you follow one at all, there is one universal truth, and there's going to become a moment in every person's life where they look to the beyond in that last moment, and it's not going to matter what you had because you're not taking anything with you. So,
well, you mean he who dies with the most toys wins?
Yeah, it's not going with you. So in that moment, you realize that it was the moments and the actions and the love that you perpetrated, not the amount of things you joined. Or you might not realize that, in which case you're probably going to come back to try to learn it all again anyway. So.
Well, that's why it's often said, just because you may be a CEO of a company now doesn't mean you are more evolved. It may mean that's the classroom you need. Next time you may come back as a beggar because that's the classroom you need. So your life situation is not necessarily equivalent to your status. It's the classroom you need to learn in.
Yeah.
If you just look to the outer trappings as a symbol of status, and this is where we get into a lot of the ideas about luxury, and we're going to explore it from different angles, not just the esoteric psychology, but we're going to look at it through the psychological lens of more the Jungian psychology of the archetypal underpinnings of why people need to own luxurious things. There's been studies done on it, and we want to quote from those, but I think what we're saying is, in the end, what the treasure that you take away, the real riches that you take away, is a greater ability to love, a wiser consciousness, a more liberated and peaceful personality. I mean, do I want to die rich and hung up? But that's where we don't equate rich or poor with states of consciousness. But it's very tricky because they are so heavily tied, because we live in a material world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Living in a material world, another song.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a very important point, because we cannot escape the context of which we live in. We can only hypothesize about this context. And we do live in a material world, and if you're hungry, or if you're broke, or if someone's coming to repossess your car, everything else seems like a luxury. So it is heavily contextual.
Well, and we've also mentioned before that sometimes the acquisition of something is, if you like, a life raft you hang on to give you a sense of meaning, a sense of self-importance, because you may doubt yourself. You may have lack of self-esteem. Yeah. And therefore, well, how do I show that I'm confident? Well, I wear confident-looking clothes. I drive a confident-looking car. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's using matter to portray something that really is portrayed by an inner state of being. But the transition from the inside to the outside takes a long time. And this is where we get into, if somebody's wearing a gold Rolex watch or something, then when they flash it, there's a different impression of that person than if they, just had a bracelet or something like that, or some beads around there. Immediately we associate, wealth with status. And that's why you say in the courts of old and the palaces, there was all the jewels, and it was luxurious, and that denoted, but that, wealth. But the wealth doesn't necessarily mean wisdom.
Oh, not at all. Right.
We go back to, the whole idea of Solomon and his wisdom. Solomon's gold is wisdom. Yeah. It's not physical gold. Yeah. And that, it's very tricky because we're inside of matter. It's like the fish in the water. It's very difficult to talk about water or no water if you're swimming inside it. Just like you're saying, if you're enmeshed in matter, to detach yourself from matter, to see yourself as spirit incarnated in matter, to create beauty out of matter, rather than creating beauty, a lot of the times we use it to bolster up the image of who we are or want to have of ourselves. I know I've gone through periods of my life where, I'll buy that particular brand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One of my favorite suits was I don't need to call the code name the brand, but it was an Yves Saint Laurent charcoal gray suit, and it was gorgeous not because it looked rich, because it had what I call the hallmark of elegant simplicity.
Mm-hmm. Sure, yeah. There's that, and if you have to wear a suit every day, there's as someone that for a time did wear a suit every day, there is great utility in, first of all, getting something that's custom made, because to your body, and also something, there is quite a bit of difference and energetically in something that's well made. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
But you want the best tools.
Yeah.
Like as a gardener, I didn't go just down to the local hardware store and get the cheapest pair of pruning shears. I got these beautiful precision-made Swiss ones.
Yeah.
Which I've had for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
I've never sharpened them, and they're still sharp.
Yeah.
And I've got a couple of them. One I use for pruning fruit trees, which are more heavy duty, another one for pruning roses. Yeah. Now, they cost several times more than the cheap ones. The cheap ones would have broken several times over by now.
Yeah.
So as we say, buy cheap, buy twice.
Yeah.
So I think the idea of buying something that is not so much luxurious, but it has quality.
Yeah.
And this is where quality sometimes crosses the line into being seen as luxurious.
Yeah, and we live in because we do live in a context. We live in the United States, and we have a system through its relationship to finance encourages an industry that is luxury, because with tax write-offs and depreciation and things like that, it creates within our culture an incentive to luxury.
And, well, maybe this is a time to mention there is a particular, if you like, a consultant in the business world called Dr. Clotaire Rapaille. And he wrote a book called The Culture Code. And I had the privilege of knowing him and working with him in a couple of different businesses. And I really like his findings. And he does these studies where he takes people back into a sort of a dream state and finds out what's their first impression of something. So if they're doing a study to find out what does quality mean, and then they go back, and then they surface, if you like, some words, and they put the words together, and it's the image that's created between the two words. It's like the classic thing of you bring a profile of two faces together and it creates a candlestick in the middle, if you've seen that kind of symbol. So it's what's created out of the relationship of what you hold.
Yeah, so sort of like a first impression Rorschach test for different
exactly. Stuff. And so, for instance, in quality, it was more luxurious in some other cultures. Mm-hmm. The code for quality in America was, it works.
Yeah, I was going to say we have a definite propensity towards utility.
Yeah, it works. That was it, the code.
Yeah.
Because AT&T commissioned that study.
That was also Steve Jobs' brilliant.
Yeah.
That was his thing, is it just it has to work.
And he talks about luxury. He did a study on luxury. It was commissioned by Boeing and another company. And the findings were that, luxury is part of our way of showing something. And he basically said, look, if you look at the different codes, he said, in different countries, luxury means something different. He said in the American culture, the code for luxury sounds strange. Military stripes, which he says, because it's an extension of the code for money. Military stripes, I'm quoting now, are a form of proof, something you wear on your sleeve for all to respect. And then he said, what's the purpose of the stripes? Largely, it is recognition. Not recognition of how much money you have, though, but of your goodness. At the unconscious level, Americans believe that good people succeed, that success is bestowed upon you by God. Your success demonstrates that God loves you.
Mm.
That was what he uncovered. That wasn't sort of his, but that was that's the belief
that's what the
that
data
lives.
showed. Yeah.
That's the belief underneath that informs.
I would say that's very American. Even if if you find yourself not to be a religious person, you still tend to fall into then your merit above all else is what matters.
And then he just caps it off by saying, when you attain this level of approval from your maker, you want to be treated accordingly. Mm. Service is an important component of luxury. And then it goes back to, every different strata in society are treated differently. They're weighted on differently. And that's all part, if you like, the materialization of the different frequency ranges of consciousness.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. We don't want to go too deep into it, but one of the things I like is he says, to succeed in marketing luxury items in America, a company needs to make it clear that it is selling stripes. Branding is extremely important. A luxury item has value only if others know how luxurious it is. And he says Rolex has done a brilliant job of establishing its products as the signature luxury watches with distinctive design, etc., etc. So does Ralph Lauren and others, and Polo. And he goes on to say it. But I think what we're talking about here is this is luxury seen through a material lens. We're not talking about now the importance of utilizing matter to create beauty, to create a new culture. We're talking about how we use matter, our relationship with matter, and we use it to show a distinction between people. You don't earn it by growing your consciousness or growing your kindness. You earn it by earning more money, by owning more stuff. And then you are, as it says here, there is a belief when he did the discovery with the American clients, there is a belief that you've earned the right to live in this way.
Yeah.
Neither good nor bad, but it's just when you begin to understand what drives people, if you're not living a life where the soul is helping you understand how to utilize matter and without becoming enmeshed in it, you live in the material world, and therefore it becomes your trading cards.
I think also, though, from a purely American perspective, just touching that for a moment, there's quite a difference between Europe in the sense that Europe has much longer history, and for the majority of this country's time, if you did have success, there's more of a chance that you made it than you inherited it. And now that's starting to change. We're now hitting the point where you're like inherited wealth is more common than self-generated wealth.
That's a very good point. And I'm going to quote just one more paragraph and then we can finish with this. But it goes to the point of Europe. The Italian culture, a culture imprinted strongly by its veneration of great patrons of the arts, defines luxury via an item's artistic value. Something is luxurious if it is highly refined, elegant, and well-designed. Luxury is a product created by an artist. The home of a wealthy person in Italy is filled with gorgeous pieces of art selected by the owner or his ancestors, etc. Then he goes down and say, well, the British use luxury to underscore their sense of detachment. They'll join exclusive clubs where they can show one another how unimpressed they are with their own status. They'll play polo matches, lose, and then tell everyone how sanguine they are about losing because winning wasn't the point. The aristocrats are notoriously unattractive and unadorned, their castles unheated, their chairs uncushioned. So he's basically saying everyone utilizes luxury in a different way. And what we're saying here behind it all, it's not the utilization of luxury, it's our relationship to matter.
Right.
Because we are incarnated, Joey. It starts off with the relationship we have with our own body. There was spiritual tradition before you're supposed to, beat yourself up and whip yourself and sackcloth and ashes and not care for your body. What we're really realizing now that the road to wholeness means caring for the whole of your being. So it's a different relationship with our own body because the body is now seen to be an integral part of being spiritual, whereas before it was cut off at the waist.
That's right. which I find interesting too, because living here where we do in Southern California in 2025, it is a bit of a luxury to even feed yourself. Like, if you eat all organic, that's seen as quite as that's a luxury in this day, but whereas like before, eating organic wasn't that interesting.
It can be a luxury, but if you have reached a point where you believe that I want the best possible nutrients, and those grown organically have got the most concentration of good nutrients, I will pay. And because it's in its early days, it costs more. And therefore, you go to a farmer's market because you then support the people growing it directly. It's no middle person. I mean, when I was living in Washington State, I was part of a consumer-supported agriculture. You get your box of veggies every week, year-round, and that's a way of directly from grower to eater.
Yeah, it is interesting that the idea of the farmer's market used to be that you may even get a discount, but now it's actually quite a bit more expensive than buying it in the store, which is a fascinating kind of thing that happens. But it's very interesting because it's so contextual in that sense of where we happen to live. In this, if you're a young person, young adult in your 20s, just owning a home is a luxury now. Whereas that used to be it's what you did. Everyone basically owned a home.
Right. So if you equate owning a home as a luxury, I can understand that. For me, the necessity is to be safely housed and fed.
Yeah.
That's the human. How do we support each other in achieving that? Well, our current system doesn't spread it out and support everyone. It supports those who are more industrious,
sure,
who have a better business sense.
Yeah.
Society isn't about the right distribution of wealth.
Right. And what's interesting is, because that's what I mean about this topic. It really does require a lot of context. But, nature doesn't distribute equally either. It does follow the 80-20 rule as well, where 20% of the enjoy 80% of the resources, So.
But nature in a self-generating and regenerating ecosystem, nothing is lost. Nothing is wasted.
Absolutely.
And everything is nourished.
Yep. Yeah.
So, and when you start to say, why don't we use that model for our society? Then people go, no, that means politically this means economically this. And people get cold feet.
Yeah.
Because it suddenly says, we're asking you to share.
Yeah, I think that's another topic too, where, when you look at that, humans have a thing that nature doesn't, and isn't that we have the ability we have a level up in terms of thinking and autonomy and, the predator in the forest, it just eats or doesn't eat,
Right, but it's part of an ecosystem that maintains its own inner balance.
Sure.
With our choices, if our choices upset the balance, then we have free will. But that free will has not created a healthy system that can regenerate health. That's the difference.
Yeah.
So it's a blessing and a curse.
Yeah.
We've been given this tool called free will because we've been invited to become co-creators. Co-creators of what? Co-creators of life. And I go back to, you and I, love reading science fiction, the fairy stories, and you always find the dragons live underneath a mountain in a cave, and they're usually breathing heavily on top of a pile of gold and jewels and things like that. They're guarding what they've hoarded. And that, if you like, in psychological terms, is the elemental self, the personality, not, has garnered everything that it believes is the riches. It's like a magpie going out and getting everything that's bright and shiny and putting it in its nest and think, oh, wow, man, look, I'm rich.
Yeah.
No, it's just kept it. All that glisters is not gold, as Shakespeare said.
Yeah.
So we go back to, if you pierce the veil of luxury, we're talking about the right energetic use of life's resources to maintain a healthy system for all beings,
right,
including humans. I mean that frames it differently.
Right. And touching on that, you just brought up science fiction. All of my favorite science fiction is they share one thing. They're post the problem, but they don't tell you how to solve the problem. So in Star Trek, they've moved past it. Everyone wears uniforms. They all, they have what they need to eat. Like you don't really talk about who gets paid what.
And they don't interfere in other civilizations.
Yeah, but they don't talk about how they solve that problem, and that's the big question.
Well, see, this is where we have to do the backcasting. Mm-hmm. Rather than forecasting. I did this when I was working with corporate America. One exercise was because we were stuck in a really tricky situation in the aerospace industry with competition with Airbus and everything like that. With Boeing was doing this, and so why don't we imagine a world where we've succeeded, where everything is fine? So what we did is we created a reunion. A 25-year reunion into the future. And we all gathered around a fire and we told stories of how we got there. Mm-hmm. Do you remember? We were facing these insurmountable odds. Everything looked crazy. But then, Bob, what happened next? And then Bob has to come up with this inspiration. Well, then we did this. And that's right. And then that led to this. And now this is why we have become the solution. So you actually generate the solution out of holding the perfection of this end game.
Right.
It's a way of doing it. It's a way of living the future in the present. And I mean, you could say, well, it's all made up stuff, but energetically, and I've done it where you actually ask a group of people, like Kennedy said, we're going to put a person on the moon and we're going to bring them back safely by the end of the decade.
Right.
Now, there were groups of people who said, the guy's nuts. We can't do that. Another group of people said, wow, what a challenge. Let's see what we can do.
Yeah.
So the American spirit is always to go for it.
Yes,
go for the impossible dream. The impossible dream is one of the codes of America.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you go for the impossible dream and then you are innovative. You look at Apollo 13, the movie. Mm-hmm. I mean, they had to fix it in a very short period of time, this problem. Yeah. And everyone pulled together and they finally did it. I mean, that was real. It wasn't just a story. Yeah. So what we're saying is, here at Meditation Mount, we believe a future already exists. It's one of harmony. It's one of love. It's one compassion. Yeah, and you can show that movie and then you're going to ask the same question you asked about Star Trek. How did we get here? Yeah. Well, how we got here is through what we believe is creative meditation, living the law or the principles and pathways. Mm-hmm. So we've got a roadmap to get there. Right. But you can't hyper jump from the present to the future state.
That's right, yeah.
You can't do the hyper jump in space. You actually have to live it and embody it, which means you have to transform matter to get there. Mm. You have to raise matter. And so the future state is one which is luminous. But what's luminous is the matter that used to be dense and unillumined. So part of revealing the future is to release the light that lives in matter, which goes back to why we have this amazing and very difficult and challenging relationship with matter. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, that's just something in everyone's kind of daily life is like, how do you balance luxury and the greater good? Or how can you be spiritually detached from matter, but still appreciate something that someone's made, or how does that look on a practical level? And I think of because in doing this research, I was looking into Krishnamurti as well. Yeah, and he wore very nice clothes, and but he also spent his entire life basically working towards the greater good of everyone, and really asked very, very little to nothing in return.
Absolutely.
So, and as someone that had traveled professionally for almost 20 years, you understand, like, when you're flying, especially when we were, for about 7 years, when we were flying almost every second or third day, all of a sudden, like, it becomes a tool, not a luxury, just to be able to fly in business class or on this tour. And we had a private plane, but one of the things I loved about Leonard Cohen was that, the plane that he had, it was very utility. It was just utility. There was nothing.
Like a VW bus with wings.
It was the seats were basically like coach seats. There was no and it fit the band and then a couple crew members, and we flew in that, and we had we just had soft drinks and snacks, no 3-course meals or anything, and but at the same time he paid everyone really well, and he kept everyone on salary when we weren't on tour. And so it was interesting, so it was like, oh, so that's a relationship to money that shows a different kind of thing. He appreciated your skills and your artist in it, and he wanted to make sure that he had the best available team with him. But, but it wasn't wasted on luxury.
Or you weren't using what other people would say is luxurious as a way of flaunting something.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
It was utilitarian.
Yeah.
You used it because that's the best way of doing it.
Yeah.
It's a great example, Joey. But at the moment, we associate with, if you have a private jet, then wow, not only does it show a luxury, but it also shows ecological and environmental non-awareness. So people, and because I know there are friends that don't fly anymore because of the carbon footprint. So it's this whole balance of how do you live a life where you are living lightly upon the earth, that you use what you need. I'll give you an example. I went through a period of living fairly well to not having anything. And I decided, because I was on a spiritual path and I was still caught up in sort of the whole idea of living a monastic life and living a life where I didn't own anything.
Yeah.
I became a minimalist, where I only had a very few things. And then when I wanted to do something and didn't have what I needed to do, I went, well, I really need this. So I shifted from minimalist to what I call an essentialist. I can own anything I want if it's essential to my ability to give to the world and my ability to take care of myself and other people.
I found that to be true, especially with a lot of the artists I work with.
Yeah.
I knew all different swaths of them, but I tended to gravitate towards artists that they might own $5,000 or $6,000 guitar, but like when they'd wear the same shirt 3 days in a row.
Exactly.
They didn't care. Just didn't matter.
Well, because it's not a status symbol, and I think this is where we go back to when you use, if you like, luxurious items to portray your standing, not just social standing, but deep, deep, deep is this need to show that I am worth something.
Yeah.
I count for something. It's a spiritual standing. You can earn money, but you can't earn spiritual status through matter. You earn it through the goodness of your heart.
Yeah.
You earn it through expanding your awareness. You earn it through service. Yeah. And it doesn't always show on the outside.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah, I that same analogy, the difference between buying a $10,000 guitar because it's a Martin and it sounds amazing and you want to record and make beautiful music, and then buying a $10,000 guitar and hanging it in your office wall so that everyone can see that you own a Martin guitar.
Exactly. I totally agree with you. So what I believe we tend to do is this whole quest to, well, it's like the alchemy. The whole process of the alchemist was to turn lead into gold. Lead, on a psychological level, is the unrefined elements of our own personality. And our job is to transmute them, to transmute the matter. And gold lives inside that lead. How do you release the gold inside of lead? How do you release the light inside of matter? Well, the alchemist had this way of doing it. And in the end, you end up with gold. But it wasn't so you could acquire more gold. It was so that you understood on an external level the inner process of achieving a state of goldenhood, which is a state of enlightenment. And then we talked before the podcast that I wanted to tell a very brief story that comes from the Jewish tradition that I think you're familiar with. But because it is archetypal of our relationship with matter. And to condense this, the story as I heard it, it's the story of a Jewish tribe. They wanted to honor God by bringing their earthly treasures into heaven. because they were very skilled artisans, and they collected jewels and fashioned gold bracelets and things of beauty. And for them, this beauty was the greatest gift that they could give to God. And so they came to the gates of heaven, and they were told that, sorry, you can't bring anything earthly in here. No, only spiritual treasure. If you want to bring gold, bring Solomon's gold of wisdom. If you want to bring gold of love, etc. They were distressed because all their lives they've been laboring to create these objects of devotion that they wanted to lay at the feet of God. And then the gatekeeper basically said, no, that's not what you lay at the feet of God. What you lay at the feet of God is a pure heart, the gold of love, etc., etc. And they were turned away and said, well, think about it and come back another day. They came back with more stuff to bring in, and they were told again, sorry. And then they came back a third time. And at the third time, so the story goes from my memory, is that they were told, look, basically, don't come back again until you've got a change of heart or change of mind. And so they went out wandering. And the wandering tribe then had to keep wandering until they were ready to relinquish the material expressions of their devotion and carry it in their heart. And you can interpret it many ways, but it also reminds me of that passage from the Bible, from the Gospel of Mark. If you want to look it up, and it's chapter 10, verse 25. It is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. Now, this throws a lot of people, off. What do you mean? I'm a good Christian and I'm a business person. You mean I can't enter heaven? No, it goes back to what you originally said. It's your relationship with this that is the big thing.
Yeah. Well, you're just taking that relationship, just calling yourself a rich person because of this material wealth. Well, we go back to the thing. The moment you die, you don't have any more of that wealth. So what are you? You're just a person, just like everyone, or a soul, just like everyone else. Yeah.
Well, I guess, see, on the journey into the subtle realms, there are baggage restrictions on this flight.
Yeah. Much like flying now.
Yeah.
You'll find.
In fact, there's no carry-on.
There's no carry-on.
There's no external carry-on.
Yeah.
You have to carry it inside your heart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That you bring with you all the treasures inside your heart. Yeah. There's no external. So we don't have baggage compartments here.
That's right.
In fact, I've said when you leave this incarnated world, this dense physical world, and return back to the subtle world, it's the only journey that you're asked to unpack for. All the other journeys you pack for it. This one you unpack for it.
That's fantastic.
It's like you let go, you unpack. Mm-hmm. And so I think the whole thing we're talking about today, it's not trying to say, is luxury good or bad? We're saying it's what is our relationship with the material world, because the matter, it's said, is spirit at its lowest vibration. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And spirit is matter at its highest vibration. Right. So they're two ends of the same spectrum, same continuum.
Yeah. Yeah, I think when you were talking about the easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle, I was thinking about back to our good friend Gatsby.
Yes.
And, he was using like wealth as an attempt to sort of heal or transform his identity. And that's a form of alchemy. It's like, I think, Bailey would probably call that involuntary magic,
Yeah.
And so, but ultimately it proves completely powerless to change his life or his karma or anything. He still is left with himself at the end, just himself.
I think what you're bringing up now is key. It's key to unlocking the whole mystery of matter, because it's about identity.
Yeah.
I am who I am. I am not what I own. And therefore, if I use external sources to bolster up my identity, not so much identity, but my image of who I think I am or would like to be portrayed as, then it's a temporary bolstering. It's a temporary accumulation of something on the outside that tells people who I am. But as you said, at the time of death, all that goes away. And who are you? Well, you're left with your reputation. What's reputation built on? Behavior.
Yeah.
How you showed up in the world. what you contributed, your legacy, well, however you want to name it. So it isn't the accumulation of riches. I remember that I told you the story before. Back in 2000, I was invited to co-host a conference in India, in Dharamshala, which was a meeting of economists, social workers, and spiritual workers.
Mm-hmm.
And we had the fortune, a small group of us, of going and spending 2 hours with the Dalai Lama in his residence. And the whole thing, the conference title was called Seeking True Wealth.
Mm-hmm.
And we said to the Dalai Lama, we asked him, what is true wealth? And he said, true wealth are inner riches, and they're limitless. You can have as much as you like. However, outer wealth, there's a limit. If you go beyond that, you're taking more than you need.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you're taking it to multiply and give to others. But he said there's a limit. But the search for the inner wisdom and the true inner wealth don't stop. Because the more wealthy you are as a spiritual person, the more you can dispense that through the goodness of your heart, through your wisdom, through your actions. And I felt that was incredibly telling. And he was saying this dressed in very simple monk's robes. And being very unassuming, not flaunting his position as the Dalai Lama, a lot of humor, self-effacing. And I thought, this guy is not identified with his role. He's identified with the truth of who he is as a spirit in human form. He's not using his status, his military stripes, to say, hey, I'm the Dalai Lama. Bow down before me. In fact, we all supplicated ourselves because that was and he said, no, don't do that, basically.
Yeah.
But we did it because that's how that tradition honors him. But you don't do it because he's a god. You do it because he's carrying an office and a responsibility for something. So you're, if you like, you're saluting the office, not the person.
Yeah.
But I thought that was interesting because he really made it clear that our identity really is an inner state of being. And we grow our inner state of being by increasing our capacity to be kind, to be loving, to be supportive of each other, not by accumulating stuff on the outside, although the stuff on the outside can be used to help others. But it's our relationship with it. I think we're going to return to this theme all day long if we carried on all day, Joe. Well, it's our relationship. It's not the thing itself.
In using that term, relationship, I also tend to see it as this. So luxury is a form of embodied energy. And so if you think about money as a placeholder for energy, then in reality, you're a steward for that energy.
Thank you.
And how do you because someone's life force had to go into creating that energy, that unit of energy. So how are you going to be the steward of that energy in that sacrifice? And is it for the greater good or for something that's shiny?
Well, that's it. You've asked the right question. We're not going to enter into it in this podcast. But Agni Yoga, there's a book called Community. And it talks about the future state of community. And it basically says, in the future, there'll be no personal property. You don't need it because anything you need, you can take.
Yeah, it's hard. It's a very triggering thing for a lot of people, especially in the United States, because our things tend to be our life. And
I have the right to protect life and property.
Yeah, and but just the idea that you don't want for when you get to a place where you don't want for food, clothing, housing. If you want to read a book, you just pull it up. There's the book. If you want to watch it, then it becomes, well, what do you really need? And then you can. The idea is that it's hoping to create a space for the true full flowering of your human potential.
Thank you. And then you have to know what's the right gift to give at the right time. I remember my friend saying, look, if somebody's down and out and sitting and hungry on the street, you don't sit down and give them a discourse on the laws of manifestation. You go buy them a meal.
Yes.
I mean, it's too much of a gap because it's like, no, I need food. And you don't give them money, as you and I well know, because the money doesn't go always to food. And I remember I shared a meme with you a while back, and I think we both remember it. There's a there's this phrase, it says, if a monkey hoarded more bananas than it could eat, while most of the other monkeys starved, scientists would study that monkey to figure out what was wrong with it. When humans do it, we put them on the cover of Forbes. Now, I mean, that's a bit of a charge in there, but what it's saying is it's an example of our relationship with that at the moment.
Right.
Not that it's right or wrong or good or bad, but it shows in nature this wouldn't show up. But at the moment in our society, this is seen to be what success is. So achievement is measured in external terms, whether status, if somebody's the VP of this or is a billionaire, where in spiritual terms, achievement is how kind am I? How loving am I? How accommodating am I to all life? And I guess that's what we're seeking to expand, our ability to accommodate life inside our heart and to be of service. So there isn't a final, well, let's draw a line under this. This is what luxury is and isn't, and you've got to do this and not this, and you can't own money. No, it's always, what is our relationship with life? And as we're incarnated in matter, what is our relationship with matter? Because matter actually is the mother aspect. So if you're looking at it, it's what's our relationship with the mother?
Yeah, that's
if you want to really start going deep.
You really want to. Yeah, because, you think about the infant that is deprived of its mother is going to view this incarnation, this plane completely differently than the one that had a mother there to protect and love it and hold it, So, yeah, it is a relationship. And that's the true crux of it, It's all of our relationships to our mothers and our fathers. Especially for men, it's all of our mother issues, and for women, it's all of your daddy issues, and together we make a big messy finger painting of the whole thing.
Yeah, but once we become liberated, that finger painting becomes this glorious work of art.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
And what it depicts is the beauty of our humanity, not the despair and disconnect of our humanity.
Yeah, it's what you. Well, the disidentification with it is first acknowledging and seeing it's your relationship to the matter, and it's really not who you are. Who you are is your reactions and your takeaways from that.
So who you are doesn't matter.
Does not matter.
Who you are does not matter.
Does not matter.
Who you are has to be lived.
Yeah. And that, I think for me, that's why I always love the story of Gatsby. I mean, I think I read that first when I was in 6th or 7th grade, and it has stuck with me my whole life. I reread it every couple of years, and just because it only takes a day to read or something, and I really encourage people. I mean, I always say this, to read the book, because the movie can't really do it justice, because it's just using their interpretation of what luxury is. But when you read it, you create in yourself the idea of what the luxury is, and so it's just a beautiful story. It's tragic. It's and I had that similar journey as where I worked in the entertainment industry, so there was a push to have certain trappings.
Right.
You weren't taken seriously if there was a period of time where if you didn't have this one kind of briefcase as a tour manager, they didn't take you seriously, and it was a briefcase that was made out of the same material that they make road cases out of. So everyone who was a top guy had that kind of briefcase. And when I got my first one, I was so excited, and I used it for one tour, and I was like, "This is the most impractical. This is stupid. Why am I? I'm just throw my files in my backpack."
Because it is not functional.
Yeah,
its function is to show that you've made it.
Yeah,
but it was not useful for the work.
Yeah.
I want to make my last contribution to this would be, we talk about people being selfish and rich and selfish. I like to place it into context that selfishness is the natural first step on the path to selflessness. You can't be selfless unless you've understood what it means to be selfish or self-centered. Because a consecrated life is one where you move on the path. And if you imagine the path being these stepping stones and you're moving from one stone to another, selfishness is one stepping stone. The problem is when we get stuck on one particular stone and can't move. And we're not progressing on the path.
Yeah.
But selfishness, or taking care of self and being self-centered, is where the journey begins. And where it ends up is understanding that the self is everything. The all-encompassing self.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the homecoming.
Right.
So let's not get down on people who are selfish. Understand it's a temporary state in learning how to expand to include others in your idea of self and compassion and well-being. So I wanted to put that because for me, life is a continuous journey of liberation from selfishness to selflessness. Selflessness doesn't mean you give away everything and you've got nothing. Selflessness means that you actually have everything.
Yeah.
Because you are not possessing it. You can take anything you need at any time from the reservoir of life in order to feed everyone, in order to feed yourself and others. Because it's not stealing. It's being part of a regenerative ecosystem. And that's what life is. It is a regenerative ecosystem. And hoarding ain't part of how it works.
Yeah.
So how do we relate to the ecosystem of life? That maybe it's a question I'd like to just leave us with.
Great. I like that. I love that.
Any final thought from you, Joy?
Well, in this sort of the second act of my life, one of the things that I wanted to focus on for me was not being a slave to my emotions. And I also found in the going down this path is that things are also kind of a form of psychological slavery. Like if your attachment to things, not just and not anything in excess or that doesn't have a utility, or that became like I started to put limitations on myself. Well, I couldn't make music because I didn't have this thing, or I couldn't, I couldn't, and so walking that back and understanding that that's not the case. I believe John. I'm going to paraphrase. I believe John Lennon said, basically, we're the Beatles. Give us a tuba and we'll give you art. You don't need the things to be the thing. You're an artist first. You're a human being first. All these other things are just different things.
Well, being a human is already a work of art,
right? Yeah,
and we
true.
use the tools to display that and to express that. Oh gosh,
yeah.
Onwards, Joey.
That's right. Yeah, and I thank you for this topic and this conversation. I think it's it's something that we all struggle with because I think we're in that transitory period where we feel it up here quite intensely, but like the 3 days before a full moon and the 3 days after, we're in that transitionary period where I think there will come a time, and probably not that far away, where we sort of look back and it's like who cares what the label of your shirt was? You just you just get a new shirt out of the machine. Just who cares what like it can be whatever color you want. It doesn't matter.
Designer jeans. It's not designer. It's label jeans.
Yeah.
Let's not. They weren't designed. They were labeled, and the label says I am this. So my identity is the label, and we're saying no. Your identity is your level of consciousness, your level of ability to love.
Yeah.
God,
absolutely.
That is not a luxury. That's a necessity.
Completely. All right. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Joe.
All right.